Hello viewer, hope you're staying safe and healthy. In this video I will go over the story of the USS Bismarck Sea, an escort carrier that was sunk by a Japanese kamikaze attack in the last year of the war. The Bismarck Sea was a Casablanca class escort carrier. This class of escort carrier was introduced towards the latter half of the war in kind of 1942. Despite this, these carriers made up one third of the U.S. Carrier force, and so were important in America's bid to secure naval air superiority. In total, 50 of these carriers were built. The Bismarck Sea was the 40th of these 50. This class of carrier was designed to be mass produced, hence why it made up such a large percentage of the carrier fleet, and also why they were built in such a short time. The USS Bismarck Sea was named after the Bismarck Sea, which is located in the Pacific Ocean. It is located northeast of the island of New Guinea and south of the Bismarck Archipelago, and was the site of a successful U.S. naval battle in which the U.S. inflicted huge casualties on Japan, as most of the Japanese ships sunk in this battle were troop transports, so a high number of casualties as they were carrying a lot of personnel. In terms of weaponry, the Bismarck Sea was well armed in terms of air defense, as you can imagine, as the vessel was equipped with 8 Bofors 40mm AA guns, 12 20mm Orkan AA cannons, later increased to carry 30. The Bismarck Sea also possessed a dual-purpose 5-inch 38 caliber gun, which gave it some defense against enemy surface vessels. But its main weapon was its ability to launch dive bombers, fighters, and torpedo bombers. These were usually the Wildcat FM-2 fighters and the Avengers TBM-3 torpedo bombers. The Casablanca class escort carriers were also used to ferry aircraft from the numerous Allied bases in the Pacific, as the war progressed in the Allies' favor. Construction on the Bismarck Sea began on the 31st of January 1944. Though she was ordered back in 1942, the reason for this delay was that these escort carriers were built in order, so as she was the planned 40th one of her ships, her construction didn't start until, after the 39th one was done, so it didn't start until 1944. Originally, she was named the Akula Bay after the Akula Bay, which is located east of Egg Harbor and indenting the north coast of Coronation Island, which in turn lies off the southeastern coast of Alaska. The name Akula is derived from an Indian word meaning night. Construction on her was carried out by the Kaiser Shipbuilding Company in the state of Washington at Vancouver. She was launched on the 17th of April 1944 and was sponsored by Miss Mabel C. Walgreen, wife of Democratic Senator Monreid Walgreen. Walgren, a local to the Washington state. This act of having a woman sponsor a vessel was not a financial one, but one more of giving the vessel good luck. And yes, the irony is not lost on me that it wasn't enough, sadly. On the 20th of May, she was commissioned into the U.S. Navy. After being commissioned, the Bismarck Sea engaged in training exercises off the west coast and made her way down to California and San Pedro. On the 1st of July, she departed San Pedro and headed for Hawaii. Her task at this time was to ferry aircraft to Pearl Harbor. She also transported the pilots to Hawaii. This really highlights that how by 1944 Hawaii was no longer on the front lines, as the front had advanced kind of closer to the Japanese home islands. After unloading at Pearl Harbor, the Bismarck Sea continued westward to the Marshalls. She arrived at Major Atoll on the 16th of July, unloaded new planes and loaded damaged ones onto her, before steaming back to Pearl Harbor. In this way, we see how important these small escort carriers were to maintaining the U.S. war machine, as they kept, moving the aircraft from the forward bases and back to being repaired. After this, the Bismarck Sea returned to the States for an overhaul at San Diego, which lasted 4 weeks. As such, throughout August, she was based in the USA. At the same time, she also received her Combat Air Contingent Composite Squadron VC-86. Composite Squadron 86 was established on the 18th of January 1944 and was disestablished on the 7th of June 1945. Benjamin Marshall was the squadron's first commander. In December of 1944, he was wounded and replaced by Darwin Schmidt. Schmidt would sadly die with the destruction of the Bismarck Sea. The squadron is credited with one kill, and by extension, the Bismarck Sea. On the 5th of January, elements of the VC-86, along with other squadrons, sunk the IGN destroyer Mumai. Though they were able to seriously damage the destroyer Honkai, it managed to escape. These engagements were around the Philippines and were part of the Allied invasion to retake the islands. By this stage, the Bismarck Sea was providing support to the invasion of Luzon. In mid-February, she left the Philippines along with her task force for Iwo Jima, one of the bloodiest U.S. offensives in the Pacific. It was one of the only battles where U.S. casualties were higher than Japanese casualties. Her main role in Iwo Jima was to protect the major warships and transports and the supply chain in general by performing anti-submarine patrols and air cover, and also providing air support to the landings themselves. By Iwo Jima, the Japanese were becoming desperate to halt the US advance, so they developed the Kamikaze. The aim was simple: fly into enemy ships and sink it. Having said that, it was also an effective terror weapon, as many US crews did fear the Kamikaze. On the 16th of February, Vice Admiral Kimpai Toriko authorized the formation of a Kamikaze special attack unit to counter the landings on Iwo Jima. The Kamikaze force consisted of 32 aircraft in total, and on the early morning of the 21st of February, they departed from Kotori Naval Air Base in Ashai, Chiba. They refueled at Haiko Jima and proceeded towards the US naval contingent surrounding Iwo Jima, arriving near sunset. The Bismarck Sea managed to splash one of these kamikaze bombers, but then another one crashed into her. The crash knocked 4 torpedoes onto the hangar deck and started a fire. The fire and damage were actually manageable, and the escort carrier likely would have survived, but then another kamikaze crashed into the Bismarck Sea. The attacker likely saw the fire and wanted to make sure the Bismarck Sea sunk. She was hit in the forward section of the ship. This is also where the first one had crashed, and so the once manageable fire became an inferno of death. This and the damage meant that the USS Bismarck Sea was doomed, and after 2 hours and dozens of small and large explosions, she rolled over and sank. Rough seas, cold water, and Japanese strafing hostile many members of the escort carrier's crew. 3 destroyers and 3 escort destroyers spent 12 hours picking up survivors, but 318 galleon sailors were lost that day. The survivors were sent to the transports just off Iwo Jima and were able to see the American flag rising on Mount Suribachi. Her name was stricken from the Navy list on the 30th of March 1945. The USS Bismarck Sea earned 3 battle stars for her service during World War II, and while 318 crew members died, over 500 survived the sinking, and in them lived the memory of their fallen comrades.